If you've ever been treated like the family disappointment while everyone else got the praise, this story is for you. My name is Sarah Whitmore. And 7 years ago, at my grandfather's funeral, my entire family laughed when they heard what he left me. Not quietly, not politely. They laughed right in my face. My older brother Ethan inherited Grandpa's cattle company. My cousin Melissa got his lake house. My aunt received a portfolio of investment properties worth millions. And me? I got an old roadside motel on a forgotten stretch of highway in western Oklahoma, a place called the Sunset Motor Lodge. 42 rooms, broken neon sign, leaking roof, half the rooms condemned, and enough debt to scare away any sane person. The moment Grandpa's lawyer finished reading the will, silence filled the room. Then Ethan started laughing. Wait, that's it? Everyone turned toward me. Melissa covered her mouth. Oh my God. My Aunt Diane shook her head. Poor Sarah. Ethan grinned. Grandpa gave you a motel? I still remember how that felt. Not sympathy, not concern. Humiliation. Because they already knew what everyone in town knew. The Sunset Motor Lodge was dying. Nobody stopped there anymore. A new interstate bypass had diverted traffic years earlier. Gas stations, diners, gift shops, everything. The motel was the last thing standing, barely. Grandpa's lawyer cleared his throat. There is one additional condition. The room quieted. He opened another envelope. Sarah must keep ownership of the property for a minimum of 5 years before selling. Ethan laughed even harder. So she can't even dump it? More laughter. I stared at the table, trying not to cry, trying not to show them how badly it hurt. Then my aunt leaned closer. Sweetheart, maybe you should refuse it. The lawyer looked up. Refusing the property would also mean assuming none of the assets associated with it. Assets, Ethan said. What assets? The lawyer checked his notes. There are currently none. The room exploded with laughter again. None. Not a single asset. Just debt, repairs, and a collapsing motel. That was my inheritance. Or so everyone thought. The truth is, I wasn't surprised. My family had always viewed me as the failure. Ethan was the golden child. Football captain, business degree, dad's favorite. Melissa became a lawyer. My cousins worked in finance, medicine, real estate. Meanwhile, I managed a small front desk at a budget hotel in Tulsa. Nothing glamorous, nothing impressive, at least according to them. For years, I'd listened to family jokes. Sarah never aimed very high. Sarah likes simple jobs. Sarah isn't business-minded. Even my parents compared me to Ethan constantly. When Grandpa died, I expected nothing, but I didn't expect to become the family joke. After the funeral, everyone gathered for lunch. I almost didn't go, but Grandpa had always hated quitters, so I went. The entire meal felt like torture. People discussing investments, properties, future plans. Meanwhile, every few minutes, someone mentioned my motel. Maybe turn it into storage units. Maybe sell the furniture. Maybe demolish it. Ethan raised his glass. To Sarah. Everyone looked up. He smiled. To owner of Oklahoma's saddest motel. Laughter erupted again. I forced a smile. Inside, I was breaking. Then something happened. Something I'll never forget. Grandpa's lawyer approached my table, quietly, without anyone noticing. He slipped a small envelope into my hand. Your grandfather asked me to give you this after the reading. I stared at him. What is it? He smiled. His final message. Then he walked away. That night, I sat alone in my apartment. The envelope remained unopened for hours. I was afraid of one more goodbye, one more reminder he was gone. Finally, I opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. The handwriting was unmistakable. Grandpa's. It read, Sarah, if you're reading this, they're probably laughing. I froze. My chest tightened. He knew.
He actually knew. The letter continued. Let them laugh. Most people only see what's in front of them. You've always been the only one willing to see what something could become. Tears blurred my vision. The motel isn't the inheritance. You are. You have something nobody else in this family has. Patience. Don't quit. Love, Grandpa. I read the letter 3 times, then 5, then 10, and for the first time since the funeral, I made a decision. I wasn't selling. I wasn't running. I was going to save the motel, no matter what it took. 3 days later, I drove to western Oklahoma. The Sunset Motor Lodge looked even worse than I remembered. Paint peeling, windows cracked, parking lot covered in weeds. The giant neon sign flickered weakly. Half the letters didn't work. It looked abandoned. Honestly, it looked hopeless. But when I stepped out of the car, I remembered Grandpa. I remembered all the summers spent there as a child, the smell of fresh coffee, the old rocking chairs, the travelers who stopped to talk for hours. The place had once been alive. Maybe it could be again. I walked into the office. Dust covered everything. The manager handed me financial records. I spent hours reading them. The numbers were ugly, very ugly, but not impossible. And that's when I saw something everyone else had missed. A pattern, a tiny opportunity, one that would change everything. But at the time, I had no idea it would eventually bring my entire family to their knees.
The next morning, I drove to the family property before sunrise. The old farmhouse sat exactly where it always had, white paint peeling from the walls, the porch sagging slightly on one side, the giant oak tree still standing guard in the front yard. But something felt different. For the first time in years, I wasn't arriving as the unwanted child. I wasn't arriving as the family disappointment. I was arriving with answers, and my family had no idea. The attorney's words echoed in my head. Your father didn't leave you what they think he left you. I still hadn't told anyone about the documents. Not my brother, not my sister, not even my husband, because something inside me said to wait, to listen, to watch, to let people reveal who they really were. And that's exactly what happened. When I walked into the kitchen, my brother Eric was already there, coffee cup in hand, feet propped on the table, like he owned the place. Technically, everyone believed he did. The will had given him the farm, the house, the equipment, everything. At least, that's what everyone thought. He looked up and smirked. Well, look who decided to show up. I ignored the comment. My sister Karen rolled her eyes. Are we really doing this again? Doing what? I asked. Dragging out Dad's death. The words hit harder than she knew, because I wasn't dragging anything out. I was trying to understand why my father had spent years pushing me away, why he'd ignored my birthdays, skipped graduations, missed holidays, why he'd acted like I barely existed, and then left behind a mystery no one could explain. Before I could answer, Eric laughed. Honestly, Claire, I don't know what you're expecting. I looked at him. What does that mean? It means Dad made his choice. The room grew quiet. He left me the farm. He pointed around the room. The house, the land, the business. Then he shrugged. You got nothing. The old version of me would have cried, would have defended myself, would have begged for scraps of approval. But something had changed, so I simply smiled. And that seemed to bother him more than any argument ever could. A few hours later, the attorney arrived. His name was Richard Bennett. Gray suit, leather briefcase, calm expression. The kind of man who had spent decades dealing with family wars after funerals. He sat at the dining room table, opened his folder, and looked around the room. Before we continue, I need to ask a question. Nobody spoke. Richard adjusted his glasses. Did anyone besides Claire read the letter your father left behind? Every head turned toward me. I shook mine. No. Good. Eric frowned. What letter? Richard stared at him. The letter your father specifically instructed be delivered only to Claire. The room instantly became tense. Karen crossed her arms. What did it say? Richard ignored her. Instead, he looked directly at me. Claire, have you brought the documents? I nodded and slid the folder across the table. The moment he opened it, Eric's confidence vanished. Richard slowly reviewed every page, every signature, every map, every deed. Then he leaned back and smiled. A very small smile, but enough. Enough to make my brother nervous. What? Eric snapped. Richard closed the folder. Your father was a very intelligent man. Nobody understood what he meant, including me. Then he continued. For years, he allowed everyone to believe the farm was the most valuable asset. Eric grinned. Because it is. Richard shook his head. No. The room went silent. No, it isn't. I watched the color leave Eric's face. What do you mean? Richard opened another file, a much larger one I'd never seen before. Then he placed several papers on the table. The first was a property map. The second was an appraisal report. The third was a contract proposal. And the fourth made everyone stop breathing. $27,400,000. $27 million. Karen stared at the number. That's impossible. Richard shook his head. No. He pointed to the map. 7 years ago, your father acquired mineral rights beneath the western section of the property. Nobody spoke. Eric looked confused. Karen looked terrified. I looked completely lost. Richard continued. These mineral rights were never attached to the farm itself. My heart started racing. Then he turned toward me. They belong exclusively to Claire. The room exploded. What? Eric slammed both hands on the table. That's a lie. It isn't. The farm is mine. The farm is yours, Richard said calmly. The mineral rights are not. Karen stood up. Why would Dad do that? Richard reached into his briefcase and removed another envelope, one sealed years earlier. My father's handwriting covered the front. To be opened only if necessary. My hands shook as Richard passed it to me. Your father anticipated this reaction. I carefully opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter, and the moment I began reading, tears filled my eyes. Claire, if you're reading this, then they're fighting. I hoped they wouldn't, but I know this family too well. Your brother wanted what everyone could see, the land, the tractors, the business. You were the only one who cared about people. You never asked me for anything, not money, not property, not favors, even after I failed you. My vision blurred, the room disappeared. For a moment it felt like Dad was sitting beside me, talking directly to me, apologizing. Finally, after all these years, I kept reading. The truth is something I never had the courage to tell you. The reason I stayed away wasn't because I didn't love you. It's because every time I looked at you, I saw your mother, and losing her broke something inside me. That's not an excuse. It's a confession, and I regret every birthday I missed, every graduation, every holiday, every moment I can't get back. Tears rolled down my face. Across the room, even Karen looked emotional, but Eric looked angry,
very angry, because he could see exactly where this was going, and he didn't like it, not one bit. I continued reading. The mineral rights were always meant for you, not because you earned them, because you never demanded them, because character matters, and because I knew one day everyone would discover their true value. When that day comes, remember this: money reveals people. Watch carefully. You'll learn who your family really is. The letter ended with 3 words. 3 words I'd waited decades to hear. I love you. The silence afterwards felt endless. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Then Eric stood up, and everything changed. His eyes weren't sad. They weren't emotional. They weren't regretful. They were furious. He pointed directly at me. You manipulated him. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. What? You turned Dad against us. Karen stared at him. Eric, stop. But he wasn't stopping, not even close. Because the moment he realized the fortune wasn't his, the mask came off, and the brother I'd spent my entire life defending finally showed everyone who he really was.
The next morning, I stood outside the courthouse 20 minutes before opening. For years, I had avoided that building. Not because I was afraid, because it reminded me of everything my family had taken from me. The lies, the humiliation, the years they spent convincing everyone that I was the problem. But this time, I wasn't walking in as the family disappointment. I was walking in as the person holding the truth. And for the first time in my life, they had no control over what happened next. Inside the courtroom, my parents sat beside my brother. Their attorney looked confident. My brother looked irritated, like this entire situation was simply wasting his time. When he saw me enter, he smirked. The same smirk I'd seen my entire life, the one that said, "You'll never win." I didn't react. I simply took my seat. Then I looked across the room and saw someone unexpected. The elderly man from the nursing home, Mr. Harper, the former business partner, the man who had given me the flash drive. He nodded once, that was all, but it gave me strength. The hearing began. The judge reviewed the evidence. Then our attorney submitted the documents, one by one. Property transfers, forged signatures, hidden bank records, corporate ownership agreements, the recordings, the trust documents. Every secret my family had buried for years, every lie, every manipulation, every theft, everything. The courtroom became silent, painfully silent. The judge spent nearly 40 minutes reviewing the evidence. Then he looked directly at my brother. "Do you deny these documents?" My brother swallowed. His confidence disappeared. "Yes." The judge raised an eyebrow. "You deny them?" "Yes." Our attorney smiled. Then he played the recording. My brother's voice filled the courtroom, clear, undeniable, bragging about how they had hidden assets, laughing about keeping me out of the trust, explaining how nobody would ever discover the paperwork. His face turned white. My mother's hands began shaking. My father stared at the floor. For the first time in my life, they looked afraid. The hearing ended 3 hours later. The judge announced a temporary freeze on all disputed assets. A full investigation would follow, and until that investigation concluded, nobody could sell, transfer, hide, or move anything. The family empire was effectively locked down. My brother exploded. Outside the courtroom, he chased me into the parking lot. "You did this." People turned. He didn't care. "You ruined everything." I stared at him calmly. "No," I said. "You ruined everything." His face twisted. For a moment, I thought he might actually hit me. Instead, he pointed at me. "You think you're winning?" I said nothing, because for once, I didn't need to. The facts were winning. 3 weeks later, everything collapsed.
The investigation uncovered far more than anyone expected: hidden accounts, unreported income, tax violations, property fraud. The trust had been manipulated for nearly 2 decades. The attorneys started turning against each other. Former employees began talking. Former accountants started cooperating. And every new discovery made things worse. My family wasn't just facing embarrassment anymore. They were facing consequences. Real consequences. The kind money couldn't erase. Then came the phone call, the one I never expected. It was my father. For nearly 10 years, we'd barely spoken. Now his voice sounded old, weak, broken. "Can we meet?" I stayed silent. After everything? After all these years? Why now? Then he said something that stunned me. "I'm dying." 3 days later, I sat across from him in a small hospital room. He looked nothing like the man I remembered, the powerful businessman, the intimidating father, the man whose approval I spent my entire childhood chasing. That man was gone. All I saw now was an exhausted old man, and for the first time, he looked ashamed. He stared out the window for several minutes before speaking. "I failed you." The words hit harder than I expected, because I'd waited my entire life to hear them, and now that I finally had, they didn't bring the satisfaction I thought they would, only sadness. He rubbed his hands together. "You were always the better person." I looked away. Part of me wanted to believe him, part of me didn't. Then he told me something that changed everything. Years ago, my grandfather had intended for me to inherit part of the family business, not my brother, me, because according to my grandfather, I was the only grandchild he trusted. When my grandfather died, my father knew it, my brother knew it, and together they changed everything. The room became silent. I felt sick. Not because I was surprised, because hearing it confirmed every fear I'd carried my entire life. I wasn't excluded by accident. I wasn't forgotten. I wasn't overlooked. I was intentionally erased. My father began crying, the first time I'd ever seen him. He whispered, "I thought I was protecting the family." Neither of us spoke for a while. Then he reached into the drawer beside his bed and handed me an envelope, the same kind of envelope that started everything. Inside was a handwritten letter and another set of documents. The letter was addressed to me, written months earlier, before the investigation, before everything fell apart, before he got sick. In it, he admitted everything, every lie, every manipulation, every decision, and most importantly, he formally acknowledged that the trust had been altered against my grandfather's wishes. The document was notarized, legally valid, undeniable, the final piece. My father looked at me. "I can't fix what I did," his voice cracked, "but maybe this helps." He folded the letter, then placed it back into the envelope. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I stood and walked toward the door. Before leaving, I stopped. He looked up, tears in his eyes, waiting, hoping, maybe even praying. I took a breath, then said the words neither of us expected. "I forgive you." Not because he deserved it, not because what happened was okay, not because the pain disappeared, but because carrying that anger had become its own prison, and I was finally ready to be free. 6 months later, the investigation ended. The court ruled in my favor. The trust was restructured, assets were recovered, properties were returned, and the truth became public. The family reputation they'd spent decades protecting vanished almost overnight. My brother lost everything he cared about most of all: status, power, control, and without those things, he had nothing left. As for me, I didn't celebrate, I didn't throw a party, I didn't buy a mansion, I didn't need revenge anymore, because the greatest victory wasn't winning, it was surviving, it was building a life without them, it was becoming successful despite everything they did. A year later, I returned to my grandfather's land, the same place where this story truly began. The sun was setting, the fields stretched endlessly into the distance, and for the first time in my life, I felt peace. Not because everything was perfect, but because the truth no longer belonged to them. It belonged to me. I sat on the porch as the sky turned orange. Then I smiled. Because after years of being treated like I was worth nothing, I finally understood something. They never underestimated my value. They were afraid of it. And in the end, they were right to be.